Hello, thank you for joining me today. As you're aware, India's foreign policy is under intense scrutiny with everybody, and I do mean everybody, trying to analyze it by reading the optics and interpreting or perpetuating the spin. But I'm talking to someone whose reportage and commentary is based on decades of covering India's foreign policy in all its complexity and bringing it to many people, most certainly to me. Please welcome Suhasini Haidar. She's the diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu, and we're going to talk about the breakdown of the Indo-US relationship, the rapprochement with China, and our enduring ties with Russia. I also want to get a sense of how the world sees India based on our foreign policy strategy over the past decade that's been led directly by Prime Minister Modi. Suhasini, thank you so much for making the time. You're working overtime and non-stop, isn't it?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on, Anuradha. I feel like, it was more than a decade ago that you and I were covering different things, economics on one side, the politics on another. Today, I can safely say that geopolitics and geoeconomics are so intricately linked that it's impossible to have the conversation about one without the other.
Before I get into the heavy stuff and trying to understand what's going on, diplomacy, I think we need a new name, Suhasini. It's a misnomer for what people are doing in the exercise of practice of international relations, isn't it? Or is it all down to President Trump and his very, very intemperate way of communicating both in the US and to the whole world?
Well, certainly, I think that the way relations between countries are being handled today is very different from the past. And one of the reasons is because people right at the top are dealing very differently with their own constituencies. They are dealing differently with each other as a result. Many of the rules by which the 1945 international world order were created are now old and have not kept up with the times. And finally, you have this idea of social media, of AI and other inventions and initiatives really taking over the space of how diplomacy is done. So yes, we sit over here, and as journalists and I'm sure as leaders, diplomats, everybody else dealing with it, they're watching their social media to see when does Mr. Trump wake up, because he will be putting out a post. When is he gone to sleep? Which means we won't see anything out of the US. How seriously should we take it? I mean, just over the weekend, we have a situation where Mr. Trump makes a statement in Washington directly, to cameras. Prime Minister Modi responds to a tweet about what Mr. Trump said. Has something changed? Has something fundamentally changed? I think that is the real question. That if we are going to informalize the way diplomacy is done, does that mean that the outcomes are as substantive as the old fashioned sitting across a table, discussing things, deciding on things, putting out a statement that is felt by both, signing on to agreements? Can we do away with those? I would say not.
So that's your assessment that the way of doing things may have changed, but what that results in is not necessarily that substantive. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that these are things that are being done for audiences, and not just Mr. Trump. Mr. Modi too
Yeah.
was speaking to an audience when he was speaking over Twitter to say he welcomes what Mr. Trump did. One of the first questions I've asked the Ministry of External Affairs without getting a response is: was the tweet that Mr. Modi gave, was the comment that Mr. Trump gave, were they backed up by any direct phone conversation between the two leaders? Has there been a letter sent by either side to the other side, or an email or whatever, saying, let's talk? Is that the upshot? And so far, it hasn't been. So, therefore, what we were seeing was a kind of posturing that is being put out for the audience. Just as last week we saw Prime Minister Modi, very, very powerful image of him with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, the three Russia, India, China countries coming together. But it was a brief moment on the sidelines of a photo shoot. Did it actually signify much more? Did it signify a coming together of the three countries in some way? Was there any statement that came out of it? No. 1 week later, there's a BRICS virtual online summit to discuss Trump's tariffs.
It's not that.
And Prime Minister
Yeah.
Modi didn't even attend. Xi Jinping and Putin were there with the Brazilian and other leaders. So that's why I mean, the final thing I'd say, Anuradha, that has changed is the rush to
Yeah.
analyze immediately. It means if the leaders are putting out statements directly to the people and announcing things, is it necessary to analyze them directly? You can report them, and that's what we do. But I think more and more we have to see a situation where at least analysts take their time and try to understand what is the actual shift being promised over here.
Also, so much, there's such a reliance on analyzing the optics in real time, as you said, and everybody is a foreign policy expert overnight, isn't it? And that can be quite harmful because, at the end of the day, these punitive Trump tariffs, we are looking at massive impacts on the ground. So, entire business units in the MSME sector going to be affected, livelihoods going to be affected directly. We talk at a different level of visas becoming a little more difficult to access, whether it's students or startup founders or businessmen. So there is real, and these are just two extremes that I'm holding up as illustrations. So uh, there is a disservice that this real time instant optics and also this very partisan interpretation that we are seeing in mainstream media and news television. And this conversation is not about that, but I can't help but bring it up.
Certainly, and Anuradha, you've done so many years in the business and watched some of the most, sort of interesting developments as well as some of the most fraught developments. The truth is also that one does just have to have the humility to say, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what is behind two leaders coming out and shaking hands in front of the media. Does it mean they were actually on such cordial terms behind closed doors? I can tell you, as somebody who's sometimes seen the body language of leaders up close, not at all. Sometimes it's extremely tense inside the room, but when they come out, they put out a different impression. Remember, they're speaking on behalf of countries. And what you've said is so important, which is that eventually these things are about the lives of people. Over the last 6 months, and of course, we can speak from the Indian perspective, and particularly because India, like Brazil, is at the highest tariff bracket of 50%. But we've seen the international entire sense of stability being taken for a six. If any other country in the world had done this, they would have been seen as a rogue state. And the disruption of lives, because as you know, it's not as if an export order can be turned on or turned off by a tweet or a smile between two leaders or something positive being said. Export orders happen way in advance. They get cancelled at a moment's notice, and that's what we've been seeing. The expectation, or at least the prognosis, that if these 50% tariffs continue, Indian exporters stand to lose about $35 billion worth of orders, shaving off the GDP of a country like India by up to between half and 1%. Those cost people jobs, they cost them their livelihoods, they cost them, their health security, food security, all of these things. So I think it is necessary to go back and say, okay, so this is what has happened. What does it actually mean for the things we have so far been tracking? One, the tariffs themselves. What does it also mean about India's energy security? Can India continue to buy Russian oil given what the US is doing and what the European Union is kind of quarterbacking over here? Three, when it comes to something that is important to India, like sovereignty and particularly the issue of terrorism, can India just kind of move aside from the comments that have been made by the US that counter India's narrative over Operation Sindhu? These are all things we can discuss, but they don't all go away with a wink or a smile or a tweet or a social media post.
So, let's start with that one big thing, the Indo-US relationship that we have come to believe, or we had come to believe, was a special relationship led directly by Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. There was such warmth, so much friendship. And then suddenly, it start was Operation Sindoor and President Trump's desire or claims to take credit for the ceasefire that was completely refuted and in Parliament by the Indian government, by the ME Minister for External Affairs as well as the Prime Minister. Was that really the reason that this relationship has soured in the way that it has?
In a space of what you've just said in perhaps a minute, are the five basic threads to unraveling the mystery that we have all seen play out in front of us. 1 minute, two leaders coming to an agreement ahead of even Trump's announcement of tariffs. The two sides agree to free trade negotiations. They have the first movers advantage. They seem to already have agreed on so much. They're thinking we'll have a first part of this deal done in a couple of months. By the end of the year, we're looking at, the first chapter. We're looking at doing this in the next, having a proper free trade agreement for the first time in Indian history. And then 4 months down the line, we see 50% tariffs. So obviously, there is something that has happened that was not expected. So the first problem and the first solution, if you like, is the one on trade itself. This is not the first time India and the US have discussed a free trade agreement. The most serious talks were held in the period when Trump was in power the last time. And between 2019 and 2020, the beginning half, there were intense conversations. Piyush Goyal going back and forth, Mark Linscott coming here, other trade negotiators at different levels, all engaged in this conversation. And those trade talks eventually went nowhere. Mr. Trump made it very clear he was upset. Even before anything else had happened in 2019 or in June, he announced he was withdrawing India's GSP status for exporters. It puts us at a disadvantage compared to our rivals in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and all the rest. So there was already Trump action that had come. There were tariffs. There were many other ways that the Trump administration was making it clear that they wanted to see a comprehensive deal on trade. And that didn't happen. So, was Trump carrying over some of that baggage from the first term? And as a result, when he met Mr. Modi in February, was essentially saying, this is our time to just get this done. We've already seen how difficult it is. And, unlike India, where, or many other diplomats who would like to put the easy stuff, let's get the easy stuff wrapped up. And the last few chapters will be the tough stuff. I think Mr. Trump very directly and through Howard Lutnick, through Scott Bessent, all the rest of them made it clear that they wanted to talk about the tough issues first. So market access on agriculture, on dairy, on genetically modified foods, discuss tariffs, India's high tariffs, discuss India's non-tariff barriers. So, phytosanitary barriers, the stuff
Yeah.
on cheese and other products. So they made it clear they wanted to say this. Early on, we heard from Howard Lutnick saying he had told Prime Minister Modi, you have such a big market. In fact, he said, you always boast about your big economy and your big market. Why can't you buy a bushel of American corn? They were making it clear that it's not, let's discuss all the things we can agree on, and then this is an extra if we're able to agree, which is what we've done with some of the other negotiations, the UK or the EFTA trade agreement does not even look at agriculture. UK perhaps didn't need to as much. Now let's see what happens with the European Union. But with America, they made that the centerpiece, whether that was right or not. So the first is trade. The second is the question of Russia. Now, obviously, it's hypocritical. It's been made, the case has been made many times that the US itself is trading with Russia, that since Trump came, they've increased their trade. They take lithium and other things, that they have not sanctioned Europe for taking energy from Russia. They have not sanctioned China, that takes much more
Yeah.
oil than India does. So the hypocrisy is there. But the question is it that Trump's frustration with not getting Putin to the ceasefire line on Ukraine has caused him to now hit out at India for continuing its oil from Russia. So that's the second. And has that been building up with Trump's frustration over the Ukraine conflict, which remember he came to power
Yeah.
saying he'll
Yeah.
have done in 24 hours. The third being over, as you said, Operation Sindoor, the narrative, counter narrative. Our narrative that we negotiated the ceasefire.
Ask for it.
Pakistan was asking for it because we had shown them convincingly our air power. Trump says he spoke. Now, there are those who have already written in so many papers that maybe we could have given him a win. But the basic thing of what he said is so in contrast with what the government said that I don't know if a government is able to suddenly say, wait a minute, no, no, we're wrong. Actually, Trump spoke to both sides. He a couple of weeks ago actually said in 27th August, I think, he said, I spoke to Modi on May the 10th, and 5 hours later, the ceasefire was done. This is something new, that there was actually a conversation. We don't know. Certainly, the government has denied there was any conversation between the two leaders. So I'm not sure if it's possible to put that, Humpty Dumpty back into the box now over Operation Sindhu, but he definitely countered India's narrative and then backed that up by his overtures to
Yeah.
Pakistan, inviting the Pakistani president, Pakistani field marshal, excuse me. So you've got that situation. The other two, last two, Anuradha, was this geopolitical? Is this more or less about Trump's idea that the world can be divided into spheres of influence? When he talks about taking Greenland or Canada, Gulf of Mexico, he's talking about his sphere of influence. When he talks about the fact that Ukraine is going to have to give up land to Russia, Europe is going to have to deal with that. He's talking about Russia's sphere of influence. When he gets tough with the Taiwanese, doesn't give them entry, wants a deal with China, and does not really give Indo-Pacific the same weight that America had once given, then is he talking about spheres of influence where India does not count for as much? And therefore, he's able to say all these things. Or fifth, and this is the final, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of speculation about this, is it personal? We've heard from former diplomats now say, it looks personal the way every time India would say something, there'd be a Truth Social post from Trump, and it was really nasty. The stuff, you're a dead economy. You want to go with Russia, that's fine. We've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. I mean, who writes
Yeah.
like that if it isn't personal? And is it linked to the fact that when Trump was out of power for 4 years, that Prime Minister Modi did not once speak to him? And then there was that 2024 statement where Trump said, my friend Modi is coming to America. I'm going to meet him. And then Mr. Modi obviously didn't meet him because he was a candidate at the time. Was there something rankling that was personal that we perhaps didn't hear about during the February meeting, but it was there in the background? I think these are all questions that have been asked, but as I said, these are the five theories, rather, that are going out there, and you can decide which mix of the five that you believe.
I can't decide. You're the expert, so you have to tell me which of these five that you're backing.
My sense is Mr. Trump took it personally that he was being countered over Operation Sindoor. If you look at all his other peace negotiations, he keeps saying, I've brought peace 7 times. All his other peace negotiations involve bringing the two leaders together across a table. They sign a document. Whether there's peace or not doesn't matter, but whether it's Congo, Rwanda, Azerbaijan, Armenia, you're looking at all the conflicts that he claims to he is taking credit for. Essentially, that's at the base of it, that he brings them together in a kind of Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and the Israeli Prime Minister Rabin kind of moment, and and maybe he felt thwarted there, and that began a downward turn. But I will say that I think at the base of this problem is Mr. Trump's conviction that India does not do a fair deal on trade. And that is the running theme through everything he has said. And the last weekend I was reminded by somebody, and so I went back to read The Art of the Deal. And you see what he's essentially saying. I just Once I decide that something is unfair or I have to work on it, I will just keep going. Eventually, I might not get everything I asked for, but it'll be a better
What you
deal than
choose?
the one that I originally was going to get. So I have my own sense has been that this is essentially linked to some of his understanding in the previous term that he didn't get India to move on certain issues, and his conviction that this time he is going to push India to open its economy in ways that has never been done before and open it for the United States.
So, Hasini, given that he does want to redress this trade imbalance between the two countries, and he is really hell bent on achieving that, given that the 50% punitive tariffs have kicked in already, given that career diplomats are hard at work still on this Indo-US deal. What are the concessions? What is the space to maneuver for India, given that all of America's cards seem to be on the table in terms of what they want, and India cannot open up its agricultural markets, to the Americans. So, what is the wiggle room? What is the trade deal going to be?
That's really interesting, Anuradha, because as you pointed out, America has really put out there everything they want. This isn't necessarily something new. In fact, one of the complaints has always been the US knows what it wants. India never
Mm.
has any asks. India's asks are basically leave us alone. Don't take punitive action against us. But what are our asks from America? That's never enunciated in quite the same way. What will a trade deal look like? And remember, there are enough people still saying, and Piyush Goyal himself has said, I expect a trade deal by November. And I have been, I don't like to get into boxes of things, but I do think that India has, whether it is on trade, whether it is on the geopolitics, whether it is on the personal insults, India has three choices. You give in, you give up, or you give back or hit back, right? What does give in look like? Give in looks like giving up, firstly, on Russian oil, because the US has made it clear the ball is in India's court. You decide to cut Russian oil, we can start, at least restart the free trade agreement negotiations.
Yeah.
Remember, there was supposed to be a group of negotiators coming to India August 29th. Those have been cancelled. So you cut your Russian oil or zero that out, and the trade talks will start again. Is it possible to do? Certainly, but of course, India has said that it is India's sovereign decision. The government has said it again and again, but we're already seeing, some of the signs of that, and we can go into that. The second part of giving in would mean at least unboxing some of the agricultural issues. With the European Union, for example, we came to an agreement to take dairy out. The dairy we will not allow into the conversation, but some of the agricultural products will be in the conversation. Whether America agrees to that or not remains to be seen, because the US has consistently said we want a full package. We don't want one thing. You take my almonds, I'll take your walnuts kind of deal. So I think there's definitely there. And then there is the dropping of tariffs. And Mr. Trump has said so many times, and without anyone here denying it or refuting him, that he believes India is ready to zero tariffs on a lot of issues. So it's a question of whether we will do that. I think a lot of the strong arming is so that when we come to the talks table, that we are ready to give more than we are ready to give right now. What does giving up look like? And giving up just essentially means giving up that there is a short term answer to what the challenges that Mr. Trump is posing to India. That would look like waiting. Don't be in a rush to go into the trade deal immediately. You'll get possibly a better trade agreement next year if you're able to work the relationship. We've already had, as you said, the 50% is already there. We know that people are already losing jobs. We know that people are shutting down units and laying off workers. But it is a pain that can eventually be swallowed by diversifying one's exports, by also giving some sops in the short term, like was done over COVID. And if we are able to weather the storm in the short term, then next year you may see many differences. The Supreme Court's
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
challenged Trump on tariffs. Maybe something moves there. In about a year, the hava around,
Yeah.
the midterms will be much louder. You may see Trump facing setbacks on other issues as
Yeah.
well. The Epstein files are going on. There's so many other areas. His plan to
So you're
militarize all of
saying
America.
domestic
So, sorry.
compulsions may take the heat off the attention he's put on the trade deal with India.
Yeah, India may not be in the yeah, we may not be in the crosshairs. So, is it worth waiting it out? Things might change. The Ukraine conflict might end, whether it's to Europe's happiness or not. Just beside the point. If there's a
Yeah.
ceasefire, for example, straight away the pressure comes off the Russian oil stuff. So is it worth just waiting? Because these are all things, the domestic stuff in America, the Russia Ukraine war, the US China detente, and possibly going back to rivalry between the two, because, they are the two big geopolitical powers. Um, just let it play out, since India really cannot change any of these in the short term. and wait to negotiate another day. That's the second option. And the third would be to give back, to hit back, to do the things like China and Canada did, countering tariffs, stepping up the Russian oil, rejoining free trade agreements, or fast tracking free trade agreements with other countries, the GCC, the Eurasian Economic Union, Australia, New Zealand, EU. All of these are, in
In
any case,
process.
in some part underway.
Yeah.
The ASEAN ITIGA consider rejoining RCEP. The US is not part of that. We will not have to deal with the tariff issues over there. Think about all these things. That is what giving back would really look like, or what we saw in BRICS, although India did not join at the top level. The idea of building common formats, getting together with other like-minded countries. All of these are options. So give in, give up, or give back are all options. You can decide which one you would prefer. I would really think that we're already in the second half, nearly the last quarter of this year. If we're able to hold on, we might find a different scenario by early next year, and a more a less difficult scenario for India, because I think right now India is very hemmed in. It is impossible to have three fronts at the same time if those are US, Russia, and China.
Suhasini, let's talk about the rapprochement with China. You were at Kailash Mansarovar, isn't it? And you managed to report from there when they started opening it up again to pilgrims, Indian pilgrims. Um, Give us a sense of what this relationship and this reset will look like, given that there is such intense distrust underlying this relationship. And critics in India, critics of the government in India, believe that India has ceded territory, space, to China over this past few skirmishes, especially of 2020 and the Galwan crisis. So what is happening here? Also, I remember, just a few weeks ago, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who heads the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, he was talking about how a reset with China may be difficult because of China's close relationship with Pakistan, which was in sharp relief during Operation Sindoor. And here we are in September talking about Hindi Chini bhai bhai again, isn't it?
Well, I think the first part is that we are in a work in progress. The rapprochement with China has only just started. In October last year, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met in Kazan, decided to start normalizing the relationship. And so, therefore, you are seeing trade being increased, although trade was always actually doing quite well, even in the worst years. Visas now being reopened. The Prime Minister himself has said direct flights will reopen, between India and China, haven't been there since 2020. And the hydrological information sharing, which was hurting India more, is now being restarted. We also have, you can obviously see at multilateral spheres, at the SCO, for example, or having China kind of supporting India on the Trump tariffs. In other places as well, diplomatically, you're seeing a lot more ease in the way India is dealing with China, and Prime Minister Modi's photo ops with Xi Jinping, and then later with Putin, clearly show that that would not have been possible 2 years ago. So you're seeing a certain process underway. I think very quickly I would like, and it's important that you mentioned all of these gradations and concerns raised by the opposition as well. There are two or three things that we don't know where they are going to go. The first is on trade itself, because India's concerns over trade have been over, very much like Trump's concerns with India and other countries, have been over the bilateral trade deficit. The second is the resiliency of the supply chains, because China has shown in the last 5 years that when it feels like it cuts exports to important things for India, whether it was the APIs, advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, whether it was more recently, on critical minerals, on fertilizers, on tunnel boring machines. So that's those underpinnings remain. And the third has been a little bit of suspicion about Chinese companies in India, particularly companies in telecom like Huawei and ZTO and all of the rest of them, that were carrying out activities that weren't just
Yeah.
about work. They were either anti, competitive laws, or they were straight out spying, is what they were accused of. In addition, there is India's, what was called Press Note 3 in 2020, where the government passed a note saying investment from China and other land boundary countries, but it was really aimed at China, will have to be scrutinized by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So is that going to go away? So the first thing we don't know is, are we going to be able to unpack the real issues on trade even today? The second more serious ones, if you ask me, is we still don't have a substantially persuasive understanding of why China did what it did in April 2020 when it rushed its troops in such large numbers to the LAC, created a confrontation leading to Galwan and the clashes in which at least 20 Indian soldiers were killed. And without understanding exactly why this happened, we're kind of doing it with the US now. Why exactly is the US doing this? We're guessing, but here it was about people's lives. It was about India's sense of security and sovereignty. And until we know why China did what it did, it becomes very difficult to say it's not going to happen again. Now we've got new mechanisms in place. We had mechanisms in place since 1993. And if they were all broken in 2020, how are we going to ensure they don't happen again? So that's the second thing we don't know. The third is what you pointed out about China occupying Indian territory. Yes, of course, China has always occupied Indian territory, whether it's Aksai Chet, whether it's other parts. But what we have seen since 2020 is Chinese troops much closer to the line of actual control in India's claim line, more importantly, than ever before. And the fact that they have not yet withdrawn those troops, or what is called demobilization, has not happened. De-escalation cannot happen until Chinese infrastructure is dismantled. So they use these 4 years, and actually, I should say, even in Doklam, before that, they've used these years to put in, underground bunkers, put in helicopter pads, put in, easy accessible roads that come right up to the claim lines. These would not have been possible in peace times. And now that China has done all of this, can we get them to reverse it? The real question is, despite not having these steps in place, so disengagement meant bringing the troops away from the eyeball to eyeball confrontation. That happened in October. That was announced in October. But certain buffer zones remain, no patrol areas. So even by the government's own admission, there are already areas that India used to be able to patrol that it can no longer patrol. And that's the government's admission. If you speak to experts in the field, they say there's a lot more that China has gained in these last 4 or 5 years that we are not speaking about as well. So even if you put that aside, the real question of going ahead with talks, because in December 2024, Mr. Jaishankar stood up in Parliament and said, until there's complete normalcy at the LAC, we cannot normalize ties. And we cannot normalize ties in other spheres. But we are now normalizing ties in other spheres, even though only disengagement has ended, not de-escalation, and certainly not demobilization of troops. So how is that going to work? Because if you've got 50,000 troops on an LAC, 3,500 kilometers long, is the possibility of more transgressions by China or any kind of confrontation between the two not still going to overhang any kind of normalization process? I think it is, and I think countries don't decide strategies on best case scenarios. They do them on worst case scenarios. And that's something we do have to be concerned about. However, given the geopolitical situation, it it was possibly only a matter of time that India and China would at least put these differences aside. And you mentioned the other over Pakistan, which is going to be a perennial. I don't think it goes away. The military chief was saying just a month ago that in Operation Sindoor, we felt like we were fighting China, not fighting Pakistan, because of the kind of support China was giving Pakistan. Given all of these issues, maybe the relationship is never going to actually be quite a normal relationship. But I think that there is a belief that in the geopolitical turbulence we're seeing, India is better placed to keep a good relationship with each of these global powers. And certainly, when you have a country that is 3,500-kilometer boundary with you, even the other side, the boundary with Pakistan, essentially, could also get involved in this. And we have one of our army chiefs talking about a single front war, not even a double front war. So you have to consistently be balancing out your resources with your priorities and with where your challenges really lie. So I don't have an exact answer for you on where this can go with China. I can see the pitfalls. I can also see the grand opportunities, and those have been spoken about so much in the press of an India and China working together, not as competitors but not rivals, not trying to cut each other out. I think that would be possible, but in a scenario where we're more honest about exactly what is happening at the LAC.
Would you say that Prime Minister Modi's government over the past 10, 11 years has has come up short in the way it's managed this relationship, the Indo-US relationship? Or do you think that given just how volatile and unpredictable President Trump is, that this is really, where most governments may have landed, most leaders would have landed because of just this X factor of President Trump? Or is it that, India fell prey to its own sort of hyperbolistic interpretation of the Indo-US optics?
I think the India US optics were actually backed up by a lot of substantial gains in the relationship. And that has been year on year since 1998. So we're looking at 25 plus years, or at least in the year 2000, 25 plus years of really improving the relationship in so many different areas, getting to a place of trust, more importantly. And that is the big casualty today. And I'd rather very quickly, anybody who was in power in these 11 years would have had to face not just the turbulence, the constant geopolitical turbulence, whether it was just coming out of the Arab Spring or whether it was all these populist
COVID.
leaders around the world, whether it was COVID, the huge disruptions due to COVID, the Russian war in Ukraine, the invasion that led to energy security issues, food, fertilizer security issues, China's transgressions at the line of actual control, the Galwan clashes, dealing with the other issues that we've had to India and Pakistan, for example, dealing with the Israel-Gaza conflict, which started out October 7th. But
Yeah.
what it has meant is essentially India's entire connectivity plans for the region are now holding. And may never actually come to fruition as a result. And remember how much investment was put into having these ports around the way, and the engagement with the UAE and Saudi and all. So there's a lot happening, which India is dealing with, which a lot of countries are dealing with. So it is a tough ask from any government. But when the winds are the strongest, it is so much more necessary to look at where your feet are. And that is where I would criticize the government. I think too long the foreign policy has been about the optics, the symmetry, the prime minister traveling all over the place and shaking hands with so many people and winning awards and all the rest. Instead, India has essentially lost its own groundedness. And I would say that in three respects. One is the most important, and now you're reading so much more about this strategic autonomy. Uh, Whether you called it non-alignment in the past, whether you called it strategic autonomy. At one point, I said we seem to be want to be all aligned, which is that
Yeah.
we'll just say whatever you want us to say. But essentially, non-alignment or the underpinnings of strategic autonomy made India able to choose, make its choices without being pulled by the US, Russia, and China. Even though, of course, there's a special friendship with Russia, I will say, but the world powers, we didn't allow ourselves to get pulled in these different directions, and somehow we have allowed that to happen by first maybe running in one direction and then with the other, not understanding why the Chinese did what they did, followed by us moving much closer to the US, and now being hurt that much more by the US's actions against us, because they were supposed to be the counter, they were supposed to be the alternative. So to come back to the center, that's the first. I think the second, and you heard about this phrase being used a lot,
Yeah.
which is global south.
Mm.
It means something. There were decades in which India was seen as the voice for the voiceless. It was seen as in a sense, the person who would stand up and say, the rest of us, those who've been colonized, those who live in the global south, which has been plundered by the global north, demand this, that, and the other. We did it with the WTO. We did it when it came to sanctions. Again and again, we said, no, we will not allow ourselves to be pushed back. But here again, we've seen a shift. Third is our region. Our neighborhood seems to consistently be blowing up And we seem to be caught on the back foot with that. So whether it's Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, I mean, even if you don't take into consideration the fact that for 11 years, we've really had no consistent conversation with Pakistan.
Yeah.
And now we work on the idea that we don't want to have any relationship, no trade, no people going back and forth, no singers, no musicians, no Bollywood. But we will, hit back every time that there is a terror attack. Even if you don't take that relationship into account, every other relationship is somehow hurting in the
So,
neighborhood.
so this point you make about India sort of abdicating, maybe, I'm not sure if abdicating is the right word, but the point you make about India not rising to the occasion when it comes to continuing to be the leader or the voice of the global South. Uh, why did that happen? Let's look at Israel and Palestine. I just spoke with the Palestinian ambassador to India last week, or in the last 10 days. He said, have you seen the Palestinian ambassador in the last 2 years, since October 7th? Do the young generation of Indians know what is at, they've just woken up on October 7, 2023, to discover Palestinians as monsters. He actually said this. So what has happened? Is that growing strategic relationship with Israel to blame for this, and the price that we've paid in losing even if not moral position, a principled position on such a huge, big humanitarian issue and crisis?
I think the Israel Palestine issue is something that India has been engaged with since
Yeah.
the creation of Israel. And it is something India has been very closely engaged with. Even after 1992, when we started full diplomatic relations with Israel, there's always been a consistency to the fact that India's traditional position on Palestine, the need for a two-state solution, is a consistent demand from India's side. Second was that we will support the Palestinian people, whether it is the funding. In Gaza, what we seem to forget is 5 or 6 major Indian contributions to universities, to libraries. Those have also been demolished in the Israeli bombardment. We haven't spoken about them at all. When an Indian soldier was killed in Lebanon, it took the government days to kind of have a response on that, and even then it wasn't there. So the point is, if you want to assert strategic autonomy has to be asserted everywhere. You can't say that here there are certain reasons why I cannot speak up. In the last 6 months, the Ministry of External Affairs has put out 2 statements on what has happened in Gaza. In the meanwhile, thousands have died. There's a specter of starvation there. There's a specter of famine over there. And regardless of who the Israeli forces blame for that starvation, it is being done on their watch. They are responsible for ensuring that the civilians there are able to access food. And if they're not able to do that, they have no business to just be bombarding an area without caring about the large civilian cost. And I'm just saying these are basic things that India would always have spoken up for, at least at multilateral organizations, if not directly to Israel. Even with Mr. Putin, Russia is so much a bigger a power in a sense. But even with Mr. Putin, Mr. Modi was able to say this era is not of war. Somehow we don't seem to see India being able to say that, and then consistently going back on certain positions. We've had, for a bilateral investment agreement in India, we've had Bezalel Smotrich
Yes.
in Delhi. This is a man who is himself a settler, who believes that all of Gaza should be annexed, that East Jerusalem should be cut off from West Jerusalem. He has actively been banned by not Middle Eastern powers or others. He's been banned by European countries, including Norway, including the UK, including Canada. They have banned this particular individual despite their good relations with Israel. And India is unable to do the same. So somewhere there, it feels like India is as helpless as sometimes we accuse the US of being in terms of criticizing. And if you start to look helpless, or start to look like, even in the face of this kind of brutality and the clear human suffering, if India is unable to speak up, then obviously it will cause damage to India's reputation. And other smaller countries, or countries who don't feel as powerful as India, look at us and say, well, if you're not able to do this, then perhaps you're not as strong as we think you are. And so we really need to watch for the reputational damage as much. I know it's easy to say, black and white, and we stand with terrorism, and that's a fact. And I don't think India-Israel relations would suffer
Hmm.
if India spoke up for what it believes is right.
We saw Israel bomb Iran. We saw India release a statement and distance itself from the SCO statement, which was much more forthright about, saying that Israel was in the wrong and it should stop its attack on Iran. Um, so it's not just Palestine and Gaza, it is Iran. It is, now in the SCO with Prime Minister Modi's visit, does it seem like, it's all tactical? It's all tactical. It's all, okay, this will look good. It might counter President Trump's pressures on us. Or is it, or am I missing something? Because really, I don't know how this works.
No, and you're absolutely right. You know what you pointed to, which is at the SEO in June, India disassociated itself from a statement that criticized US and Israel for bombing Iran, and particularly the nuclear safety issues. India said we're not part of this statement because it is critical of these particular countries. However, when it comes to the SCO, we suddenly saw India signing on to an SCO statement that was actually critical of US and Israel. And the SCO joint statement, joint declaration that Mr. Modi has signed on to actually criticizes the US and Israel for the bombardment of Iran. So again, it begins to look like weakness. If just 2 months ago you said I'm disassociating, 2 months later you join on to a statement like that. You can say that this is diplomacy, this is what you need to do to get your concerns also reflected in the statement, but essentially, as you pointed out, it begins to look transactional.
So, Hasini, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. You've been very patient and offered great clarity on what is a really, really complex subject. I do hope that we can continue to keep talking.
And I want to thank you, Anuradha, because it is possible for so many to say it doesn't matter or foreign policy doesn't matter. Or at the end of the day, my life is not changed, but your life is being changed. So it's necessary not only to understand what the geopolitics of the moment is, but also to question the decisions that are being taken.
And thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you will subscribe to this channel and that you will share some of this work if you like it. And if you're not already reading, make it a point to read Suhasini's column and writing in The Hindu. And she also does this weekly video podcast called Worldview. So do check that out as well. Thank you.